From directing Bear Grylls in a camel carcass in the Sahara to becoming an author and novelist, my guest has had a very diverse palette of roles. My guest is Tony Lee Morale, and Tony is not only a director, a producer, an award-winning natural history filmmaker, but he's also an author and a novelist. He has directed and worked with Animal Planet, Channel 4, ITV, Discovery, National Geographic Channel, the BBC, and many more. And Tony has not only directed people like Bear Grylls, Ray Mears, Stephen Fry, and Bill Bailey, but he has also moved on to produce and direct his own films. And one of his latest films is The Cat That Changed America, which also has a book that he wrote and published to go along with it. So without further ado, let's get on with the podcast. This podcast is proudly powered by Battle-Born batteries. Let the power of lithium take you on your journeys across the outdoor world. Battle-Born Batteries is the industry's top choice for lithium-ion batteries. Reliable, safe, and long-lasting, Battle-Born makes the sustainable and lightweight drop-in replacement for traditional lead-acid batteries. Are you ready to make the switch to lithium and switch to green energy? If so, all batteries are in stock now, and you can shop today at battlebornbatteries.com. Hi, Tony. Thanks so much for taking the time out this morning to be on the Master Wildlife Filmmaking podcast. I say this morning, it's actually your evening. You're in Bristol, UK. I'm over in Nevada. How are you doing this evening?
I'm very well, Jake. Thanks for inviting me. I've been a big fan of your Master Wildlife Filmmaking podcast, so it's great to be a guest on it.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to start this as we do with all of these, and that is to find a little bit out about Tony and what it is that got you into the wildlife filmmaking industry. So what was it that propelled you into this industry and got you where you are today?
Well, I've always been interested in animals ever since I was a child. I was lucky. I lived by the sea. I grew up in Hastings. We lived by the beach, so I was either on the beach in the rock pools or in the sand dunes, or we had a back garden, so I was very fascinated with insects and seashore life. And I was just enamored by the ocean growing up. I was always looking out to sea in Hastings, hoping I would spot a dolphin or a whale. I was really very keen on whales and dolphins as a child. I never saw one, of course, off the south coast of England, but at that point I didn't know, that wasn't the best. And I remember going to Brighton to see a dead whale, because at that time in the 70s they were taking these poor dead whales that were washed up on the beach and almost like zoo exhibits, taking them around the country. So I remember going to see, it was probably a dead fin whale or something, and being really fascinated by its anatomy and physiology. And even though it probably stunk to high heaven, I was really fascinated by wildlife. But I got into the wildlife filmmaking industry. I did my degree in zoology. So after university, by that time my family had moved to Bristol and had gone to school and college in Bristol, so I knew about the natural history unit, obviously, at the BBC, and The Trials of Life had just aired, and Life on Earth had aired many years earlier, so I was very keen on those, and they were part of our zoology course as well. The meerkats were infamous, obviously, at the time. They had so much hype. So I just kept writing and sending ideas to the BBC, and eventually they probably got tired of me writing, and they just took me on as a researcher, and I was working there throughout the 90s.
That's fantastic. So you knew very, very early on what it was you wanted to do. You had this kind of planned out that you would get your zoology degree and then, head into the filmmaking industry. Somewhat. I've always been a keen writer, so I was always writing stories as a child. It's a real passion of mine. So I've always been a communicator, and writing animal stories was probably part of the goal, or certainly about the environment.
But I remember the kind of turning point. I was 16 and I was either going to become a journalist or I was going to really become a wildlife filmmaker and storyteller. And I read Life on Earth again over a weekend. And I think Attenborough's prose made me decide to pursue zoology. So yeah, I've got Attenborough to thank for. And it was my first job on television was actually researching for David Attenborough on his series The Private Life of Plants back in 92 and 93. So yeah, it was I think you can just call it destiny really. It was in the stars for me to follow that course.
So after you were a researcher, what was the progression from researching for Attenborough's programs to then, moving into producing and everything else? How did that work for you? That progression?
Well, at the BBC or in the Natural History Unit, it's a great learning curve. It's almost like doing a university or masterclass in filmmaking. So you're a researcher for a few years and then you're promoted to assistant producer. And that happened to me in the mid-90s. I went from researching a few series to becoming an assistant producer, which means they give you more responsibility and they allow you to go on shoots and direct sequences with cameramen. So in the mid-90s, I worked on a series called Land of the Tiger. So I spent 2 years in India on and off. It's an amazing job, really, because got to go to India and Nepal and Bangladesh and Pakistan and the Himalayas and Assam and all these far-flung places and Bhutan, and saw incredible amounts of wildlife. And so from there, you become an assistant producer and then you get promoted to a director. And then after Animal Zone, after Land of a Tiger, I was on Animal Zone for 2 years, which was a Sunday night tea time series. And I was directing with Chris Packham, Simon King, Michaela Strachan. Got wonderful memories of going to the Bahamas and Yellowstone and Ecuador and directing, swimming with dolphins or being up close with bison in Yellowstone or going to Isla de la Platas off Ecuador with Chris Packham to look at seabirds. So that was the progression. And again, as I said, you really learn your craft in directing, working with animals and presenters.
So did you have much experience actually with wildlife before you got into the industry, or did you find that kind of built as you started getting out in the field and directing?
Well, I had done a zoology degree and my specialist was animal behaviour. So my third year thesis was on fallow deer in Berkshire. So spent a lot of time with deer, observing deer, and making it relatable to the scientific community because fallow deer in game parks are caught and they're weighed and you assess their stress levels and how females compare to males. And you find out that actually it's the males which are more skittish than the older females because the young bucks get very nervous and they have high levels of stress levels and cortisol. So I had the trainings to be a zoologist, but I obviously decided I wanted to be a communicator and storyteller rather than collect scientific data. But that grounding was really essential for my years as a researcher, as an assistant producer. So I felt comfortable talking to scientists on the phone about animal behaviour or looking at data or collecting data from journals like Nature or Scientific American or Ecology, because doing university, you obviously have your dissertation and you have to do citations and reach out and keep up to date with current affairs in the natural world and natural behaviour. So all that was great grounding, and obviously I had 3 years of that at university.
Now, was directing kind of your passion at this point? Did you choose to stay with directing, or did you kind of move between producing and directing? What was your choice in terms of where to stick, as it were?
I did enjoy directing. I very much enjoyed being in the field, being outdoors. I had a very good experience in Florida and the Bahamas and Yellowstone, and I'd always wanted to work in America. So at the end of the 90s, this was 1999, after 7 years at the Natural History Unit, I think I developed the 7 year itch. And I really wanted to
Right.
move on because I was still in my 20s. I was 26, turning 28. And I got a fantastic job offer with National Geographic and PBS. They said they were looking for an associate producer to work on a series called The Shape of Life, which was a big budget blue chip science series. And it wasn't just blue chip, i.e. animal behavior, it was science. And that really attracted to me, working with scientists. And so I got an I visa from them, and I went over to live in California for 2 years, which was an incredible experience. We were set up in next to the Monterey Bay Aquarium on Cannery Row for a studio called Sea Studios. And so I was working next to the ocean, which was my ambition, having grown up in Hastings, and I literally did fulfill my ambition and see dolphins and whales in the wild in Monterey because I went out on a whale watching boat, I remember. And obviously,
Excellent.
Monterey is very famous for its grey whales and even killer whales. Um, and so being next to the aquarium was fantastic. We used to call it the commissary because we would go there for lunch at the canteen and see these fantastic images of the moon jellies. And if you've been to Monterey Aquarium, it's a fantastic backdrop. It's one of the best aquariums on the west coast, and being surrounded by that atmosphere. What I associate with Monterey is the fresh air, the sea otters in the kelp forest. You can watch them from the shore. The sea lions. So it was really, really a fantastic place to work for a couple of years.
How did you come across that job? Because you were working at the BBC Natural History Unit. So to make that leap, were
Yeah.
you actively at that point looking for work, and you found that listed somewhere? What was that kind of that transition like?
Well, like most jobs in the natural history unit, natural history, it's a very people connected industry. So I would go to Wildscreen, and I met the series producer. This was October '98, I think, who had come over from the US because they were promoting The Shape of Life and they were getting funding. And so um, I was I spent Christmas in California that year. I went to visit them in Monterey, and afterwards they offered me the job. So I gave my notice at the Natural History Unit, and was on a plane to Monterey by May. Stayed there for 2 years.
That's excellent. And that just again shows the power of the film festivals and networking.
Yeah.
Because had you not been there, then that may have never happened, and you might still be at the BBC, with that itch. so,
Yes.
it
Yes.
really does show the power of heading out and networking.
Absolutely.
What
I
was
think
your?
film festivals are very important.
Sorry, we got a bit of a delay happening here. So you spent a couple of years there working for them. What was your next move from there? Because a lot of people looking to get into this industry, they hear you're working at the BBC, you've moved up through the BBC as researcher, assistant producer, director. What could be better? And then you move and you come over to the States, and now you're working on with PBS and National Geographic. Again, what could be better? What did you do from there? What was it that then made you transition again from there?
Oh, well, my work visa ran out. It was a 2 year sponsorship. Anyone who works in America knows you either get a green card or you get married or your visa runs out. And the options for me at the time was to come back to the UK, which I did in 2001, 2002. And again, I was fortunate because I got a job at the BBC Science Unit in London. And they took me on, obviously, because of all my years in the Natural History Unit. And I was developing ideas with a natural history slant or an emphasis. I worked on a series called Body Snatchers, which was about parasitology, parasites. It was a BBC One series. I worked on developed a series called Killer Dinosaurs because of my natural history upbringing. I had a good background on dinosaurs. I did a series development on Jimmy's Farm with Jimmy Doherty, and that ran for several seasons. So, yeah, I was fortunate, carried on at BBC. And then after that, I went freelance as a producer and worked for many years as a producer.
It's it's interesting because there's a lot of people I know who work really hard to get to the BBC, right? It's all try. How do I get into the BBC? How do I become a researcher? How do I move up the ladder? And then obviously you're there and you start working up the ladder. How important do you think it was for you to make that decision to move away? I mean, I know this is not for everyone. It's a very subjective decision. But do you think would you be in the same place today, you think, if you didn't make the decision to go across the other side of the world and work for a different network? Was that important to your kind of life goals and career?
Well, it's certainly important to my life goals. As I said, I've always been very America-centric. I grew up watching a lot of American television. I was fascinated by the Wild West. I told you about my interest in, the Pacific Ocean. So it was inevitable. I don't believe in regrets, and you choose your own path in life, and sometimes it chooses you with circumstances. So it's not a regret decision. I look back and say, I wish I'd stayed in Bristol, because I had so many fantastic opportunities, made some great friends who I'm still in touch with, and we go on to say that I got a green card about 7 years ago, and so I've continued my relationship with the US and been back and forth and worked for several networks in the US as well, which I probably wouldn't have done if I didn't have those kind of foundation years working in the US as well.
And of course, now, the world is a much, much smaller place. Certainly when it comes to natural history, it's really opened up where, there's so many collaborations between networks and production companies. I think today it's so much easier to make that transition than it was 20 odd years ago. So now you're a freelance producer. Tell us about some of the projects, kind of, what it's always scary when you go freelance, right? I don't think it matters what role you're in, but when you decide to stop getting that, consistent paycheck coming in and you go freelance, and now, you're pulling in work, every single gig that comes in, you've got to find. In some cases, it can be a regular, reoccurring, gig coming in from networks or production companies, but not all the time. So what was that like when you decided to go freelance? Did it come easily straight away, or did you have to work hard at it?
I think when I returned from the US, initially I had to work hard because I'd been out of the circuit for 2 years. And people obviously have short-term memories, and there's always a new level of people coming up the ranks in the industry. But as I said, I was very keen to diversify, so I was very interested in science, which is another network in London and also now in Glasgow and other parts of the UK. So I don't think, as you said, you shouldn't really limit yourself. Certainly Bristol's got some fantastic communities, but I wouldn't say it's the centre of a wildlife community because with the proliferation of streamers, you can really base yourself anywhere. And there's some fantastic output of programmes coming from the US. I really admire The Secret Life of Whales, which is produced out of Washington. And there's some great companies in California producing wildlife. And a lot of our best cameramen and producers, they're fortunate to live in the US, in the Rocky Mountain states, wherever they choose to live, because the industry is now so wide-ranging, I think, and it's very different from 20 or 40 years ago, when Bristol was more of a nucleus.
And it used to be so much harder just to connect with people in other countries. And now, of course,
Yeah.
for pretty much for free, we can just turn on a camera and be chatting, the other side of the world.
Yeah.
So as a freelance producer, tell us about some of the projects that you got involved in. I know some of the latest projects, we'll get to those. But in terms of when you first went freelance, what were the bigger projects that you were able to sink your teeth into? And how long did they kind of last as a freelance role?
Sure. After the BBC, I did a few series for Channel 4. I really enjoyed working with Bill Bailey. We did a series called Wild Thing I Love You, which was a kind of one-hit wonder, about a group of scientists in the UK who would build engineering solutions to help wildlife. And I did two great programs, which I'm very proud of, called Bats and Puffins. And I did a lot with Bear Grylls on Man vs. Wild, the early seasons, and that would take me to Alaska and Iceland and Russia. I did a fantastic two-part series in Russia, and also the Sahara. I'm quite infamous for Bear sleeping inside a camel, that episode I directed in the Sahara. And so those projects come to mind. I did another series with Bill for Sky called Bill Bailey's Birdwatching Bonanza. And so those were the highlights. I don't think they ever reached the peak of The Shape of Life in terms of amount of money we could put on screen, but they were kind of mid-range series which were great fun to do as a director, producer, and working with top talent as well.
So when you're directing something like Man vs. Wild with Bear Grylls, and a scene in the Sahara inside of a camel, what is, I think a lot of people get confused as to how these shows are put together. They see Bear Grylls and they think that really Bear is just doing his thing and the camera person's just tagging along, capturing it all on camera, and there's a show. Tell us a little bit about how you direct, and how director and producer and host and camera person, how all those roles fit together to create that final show.
Well, it's scripted, obviously, like most television shows, whether it's constructed reality. And the great thing about Bear and his cameraman, they just got on so well. It was like choreographing a dance. They were compared to Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. They had that great camaraderie. So my role was to come up with the stories and the survival tips and the wow factor. So, for example, in the Sahara, we would use survival tips of what animals you could eat, or where you could find water was obviously very key, how you could find shade. And in Russia, how to keep warm, how to lay a trap for, say, an animal or a squirrel, or how to climb and look for edible plants. I also did a fantastic one-off special because Bear went to go out in the wild with celebrities. So I directed the one with Stephen Fry in the Dolomites, which went out on Channel 4 on Christmas Day, which was a real highlight for me to get the Christmas Day slot. And that was great fun because, working with Stephen Fry, who's very erudite and very funny. And so that was a pleasure to do. But I think it's finding stories which would really appeal, especially to people, whether they're armchair travellers or people who are seasoned travellers and love being out in the wild, and finding those surprising stories as well was always key. So, for example, for the camel story, it wasn't taken from The Empire Strikes Back. It was actually a real Berber trick. If they were stuck in a sandstorm, they would sleep next to their camel, or build a shelter over their camel, or if the camel had died, sleep in the innards of a camel. So always looking for that kind of credible basis as well.
Now, in terms of storyline, one of the things that comes up a lot when we talk about story, or new people getting into the industry, worrying that there's nothing new to film, in natural history. It's like, well, everything's been filmed, and what do I do now? How do you go about looking at new storylines? Because of course there's always a new take on something. There's always, there's new behavior being found for a start, but that's kind of the new stuff. But how do you go about looking for storylines which might have been told before, but looking at a fresh way of telling it?
That's a good question, because we're always looking out for new stories and fresh stories. And I remember living in LA after The Shape of Life and wanted to do something about Los Angeles. This was 2001. And I was researching stories and thinking, well, is there any wildlife there? Is there any exotic wildlife? And so could I do a story about the parakeets? The escaped parakeets? Could I do a story about the trees in LA or the migratory bird life? And I didn't have an answer. I couldn't find a compelling answer. And it took me 15 years before I found the answer of a story I wanted to do in Los Angeles. And it came when I just got my green card, actually, and I'd gone back to work in LA on Through the Wormhole with Morgan Freeman. And at that time, there was a very famous newspaper article: mountain lion breaks into LA Zoo and eats a koala. And it was like a gift from heaven to have that story. And if anyone who knows the story, the mountain lion is P22 mountain lion who lives in Griffith Park. And he had broken into LA Zoo and allegedly mauled a female koala. And then I began to investigate P22 and just found out he had an incredible story and no one had told it. And so it's just ripe for the telling, and that's how I came to produce and self-finance, because I was so passionate about it, my documentary, The Cat That Changed America, which has been a huge part of my life, really, for the last 5 years.
And that's great because, well, one, I know P22 well. With my films I've done on overpasses, and with the overpass being built, I think it's going to be the largest overpass in America, over 10 lanes in LA. And they're currently breaking ground, I believe, right now to start that project. That's very close to my heart. And obviously I worked with mountain lions with my wife for many, many years. It was great to see that you've taken that story, because it is an amazing story, and it's something that got highlighted by Steve Winter, and obviously the picture of P22 with the Hollywood sign in the background for National Geographic magazine. Tell us a bit about. So you as a freelancer. Right, you took that role on to say, okay, I'm gonna produce this, I'm gonna finance it, I'm gonna direct it. It's a great story. What was your reasoning behind doing it that way, rather than pitching that show, say, to National Geographic or to the BBC or whoever else, and having the connections and the history that you have? You could have easily have done that. So what was your decision making kind of to go that route?
Well, the previous year, I was quite confident as well, having lived in LA. But again, it's like fate. With my green card, I got my green card in September of 2015, and I went to Jackson Hole Wildlife Film Festival, and I won the Special Jury Award for the shape. It's called The Secret Life of Your House, and it was an TV1 production with George McGavin as a presenter, about what would happen if a house was full of bugs and rats and mice. It was a very fun experiment to do. And so I just won the award, and I was feeling quite confident, because this business can knock you down a few pegs quite often. And I was living in Los Angeles, having finished the Morgan Freeman series. And so I thought, well, why not? Let's have a go at, producing, directing and financing your own documentary. And instead of taking it to the networks, why don't you try it on the independent film festival circuit, which I'd never done before, but I've always been interested in, because you hear tales of directors going off to Sundance and all those glamorous places with their films and doing really well. And also Free Willy had done well, I believe, around about time. And so there was a certain interest and buzz in natural history films, documentary features. And so I'd met this great cameraman at Jackson Hole called Alex Rappaport. He lived in LA. So I asked Alex to film it. And that's the other thing which is very key, having collaborators you enjoy working with and who bring a different set of skill sets to yourself, because I'm more of a producer, director and commissioner. And so I'd saved a bit of money, and I just decided to finance it myself, produced it. Alex filmed it, and I edited it back in the UK. Again, I used previous editors I had worked with who gave me mates rates to edit, which was great. And so I would view the rushes that Alex sent over iCloud from LA to my place in Bristol, and these huge files. So I was very meticulous in just editing the script and then sending that off to the editor, and then decided to send it off to wildlife or film festivals and see what luck. And I had a great Christmas present that year. It was 2016 turning 2017. It was accepted into the Santa Barbara International Film Festival, and that was a great festival for it to premiere. It was actually quite perfect because it was within driving distance of Los Angeles. So it was in California, where a lot of the community knew about P22 and also about the wildlife crossing over the 101, which is at Liberty Canyon on the way to Santa Barbara. And it was also within driving distance of LA, so a lot of people from LA could drive over for the world premiere. So we had the world premiere in February, which actually turned out to be 5 years. Again, all the stars are aligned here. Since P22 was discovered in Griffith Park by Miguel Ordiñana, the wildlife biologist, who caught it on his camera trap. And so we actually premiered the film on the 5th anniversary. And Beth Pratt, who you mentioned earlier, she was campaigning to build a wildlife crossing. So I knew that was a very important part of the film, to give it a conservation focus and a sense of purpose. And they were looking for funds to build what is now the Wallace Annenberg Foundation, named after the Wallace Annenberg who gave a healthy donation. And so that work has started on the bridge just earlier this year, and it will take a few years to complete. But I got a very fabulous write-up a couple of days in the LA Times. They probably credited The Cat That Changed America more than it was due to like raising awareness. But I certainly hope I raised a lot of awareness about the crossing MP22.
Well, that's fantastic. And I mean, the great thing about stories like that is if you catch them at the right time, so much of the time you can get more credit, and people are way more interested in spreading your film, spreading your story because of timing. And certainly my Crossing film, Reconnecting Wild, had that same impact in terms of it was at the right time. It's been still being shown at conferences all over the place, based on its timeliness and the fact that we now know that we need way more crossing structures around the world, but certainly here in the US. And people are tuning into that. And of course, now there's federal funds that have been made available for these crossings, which is fantastic. Do you know off the top of your head how much the overpass in LA, I think they'd raised like 40 million, was it? Or was that their amount they were trying to raise?
I don't want to give out inaccurate figures, but I believe the cost of the crossing is about 85 million, and they were on target to certainly start development, which they did.
Excellent. Yeah. And I couldn't quite remember. I knew it was a substantial amount of money because of obviously where it's going. It's a hard place to put a wildlife crossing in. So, are you able to talk about the budgets for your film in terms of self-financing and what have you? I think it's probably really interesting to listeners to find out how much it cost for you to put that together.
Sure. Well, as I mentioned, film festivals have certain categories. If it's a feature, it generally has to be over 50 minutes. Or if it's like a long form feature. Some festivals require it to be like over 70 minutes. And I did two versions. And in hindsight, I would have only done one version because two versions means that obviously more in post-production, and it's a bit of a hassle. But one 50 or 55 minutes, I think, is good for most film festivals to be accepted. I was also trying for the big festivals like Sundance and Tribeca. But as I said, we got into the Santa Barbara Film Festival, also the LA Festival. LA has quite a few festivals, and obviously it's an LA story. There was a DTLA, Downtown Los Angeles Festival that we screened in. We did go to New York at the New York Wildlife and Conservation Film Festival. I had a fabulous festival at San Luis Obispo, which is a lovely town just north of Santa Barbara, which I knew well from my days in Monterey. I'd always, stop over in San Luis Obispo. It was a very friendly film festival. And so we did a lot of the California film festivals. And for the budget, I wouldn't say it was that much. I was just carefully budgeted, obviously paying the cameraman and the editor and the post-production. And just getting someone. It's very important for film festivals to have the right kind of format for them. And so you could go to your local cinema or projector house. I went to the Watershed in Bristol, and there's a fabulous team there who helped me get the right format to show at all these film festivals. I think it's called a DCP. It's taking my mind back a couple of years now, but film festivals require it. Is it like the DCP for their format?
Yeah, and it can get expensive doing that. So, and I know now a lot of festivals will actually convert for you. They have the software now to be able to do those conversions, but not all of them. I recently got introduced to Athletic Greens as a way to optimize for better gut health, get more energy, and optimize the immune system. So what is this stuff? Well, with one delicious scoop of AG1, you're absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help you start your day right. This special blend of ingredients supports your gut health, your nervous system, your immune system, your energy, recovery, focus, and aging. It's a lifestyle-friendly brand, which means whether you're eating keto or paleo, vegan, dairy-free, gluten-free, it's going to work for you. Contains less than 1 gram of sugar. There's no GMOs, no nasty chemicals or artificial anything, while still tasting good. And for every purchase, Athletic Greens is going to donate to organizations helping to get nutritious food to kids in need, including No Kid Hungry here in the US. In fact, in 2020 alone, Athletic Greens donated over 1.2 million meals to kids. And not only that, Athletic Greens is a climate neutral certified company. Again, in 2020, Athletic Greens purchased carbon credits to support projects protecting old growth rainforests. That's huge. Right now, it's time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with the convenient daily nutrition. It's just 1 scoop in a cup of water every day. That's it. No need for a million different pills and supplements to look out for your health. So to make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do to get this deal is visit athleticgreens.com/emerging. That's EMERGING. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/emerging to take ownership of your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. Now back to the show. So in terms of recouping your cost, and this is how, this is a question that is on the minds of pretty much every freelance filmmaker, wildlife filmmaker out there. They want to know, if they put themselves out there and they make a show, how do they then go and recoup the cost? Are they going to sell it? Are they going to license it? Is it going to be acquired? What is your goals for a show like that? Are you looking to have it as an acquisition to a network, meaning they pay for it for a certain amount of showings, or they buy it outright? What's the best case scenario for you with a film like that?
Well, I like to say I didn't make it, to become a millionaire. I know practically we need to find ways to finance our films and obviously keep going with our passion. But I did find a distributor. I'd been approached by a few distributors with offers, and I went with Earth Touch, which is a South African distributor, because I knew them basically. I'd done some work with them, and I knew them from the festival circuit and liked working with them. And so they took it on as an acquisition, as a pre-sale as well. And so I think we sold it to a couple of animal digital channels in Europe. But also they put it on the internet after a few years, because it'd been out since 2017. So I think about 2 years ago they put it on online, and so it's now on pay on demand. And so it's actually very cheap to watch. It's only about a couple of dollars, but those couple of dollars add up in the long run. And I also wrote a book to accompany it, a children's book, which again is a passion of mine, because I'm a storyteller and a writer. And so I thought it'd be great for kids to find out about P22 and his amazing, incredible journey. And so I've been promoting the book and the film alongside each other.
Yeah, that's a great thing to do. I too have created a kid's book, Spoon of the Bear, which kind of fits in with all of the bear filming that I do of urbanized bears. How important do you think it is for filmmakers to look at diversifying their income streams like that? Because it can help in two ways. It can help if you can sell the book and you can actually get funds back in from the book sale, but also it's another thread that you've got out there that brings people back to the film and the story. Do you think that's essential these days in terms of part of your marketing plan, or is that just something that's nice to do because you enjoy writing?
I think as a storyteller, we should think about formats on social media, whether it's short films on Instagram or Facebook. And I would do that. I actively promote on social media. Now, obviously, there's TikTok, which reaches a huge number of young people, and that's really important. And so even if you're putting out short versions of your film, or have a campaign strategy around your film, is very important to raise awareness, to have trends, to really create that kind of brand. And so I strongly believe in that, and that's actually quite an economical way to reach a large audience. You just need the time to do it, really. You've got to dedicate time to social media, especially TikTok. And all the young people today, they're called content creators. And so these content creators, they really invest their time and their energy and passion and put music to their short videos, and they edit it. And it's quite cheap to do, but you just need the dedication and the creativity. And if you're a wildlife filmmaker, in theory, you should have those editing skills and that storytelling passion to do that. So I would really look at that strategy, I think, especially if you're coming up the ranks.
Yeah, great advice. And yeah, social media is obviously an easy one because it's free. You don't have to have books printed and things like that, but it is time. I always, I get a lot of questions about the book publishing and how long it took, and the marketing. And I always tell people that writing the book, and my book's very small. It's a board book for kids, but the creation, the idea, the implementing, the getting to the stage of having the book in my hand was really about 5% of the overall, because the marketing never ever stops. And, that's really the 95% of the time you're ever going to put in is then marketing and keeping it going. As an author today, you have to be in control of your destiny of, where that book goes. Unless you have a publisher doing it all for you, which is fairly rare these days, you're always going to be part of the distribution and marketing of how your product gets out there. And so really, really important. So Tony, what is next for you? What are you working on right now, and what are your goals for the future?
Well, I'm working on the science series at the moment. It's on climate change, which is really interesting and very exciting. I've been working on that since the spring. That will go out on Discovery Channel end of the year, probably end of next year. And my goals is really, like most wildlife filmmakers, it's to find those great stories like P22, because they don't come along often, to find stories like My Octopus Teacher. I'm very much interested in stories with the animal-human interface, with a conservation message or a tagline or a campaign or a purpose like the Wildlife Crossing. And those stories, they're quite hard to find. So you need to really be out there engaging in the science community, talking to people, going to conferences, going to wildlife film festivals, because there's so much you can find down the rabbit hole of the internet. You really got to engage in the world, I think, if you're a filmmaker.
What would your advice be if someone has found the next P22 story, right? And they have camera gear. I get this a lot with my mentoring group. People, think they need to go out and make the story to sell the story. But what would your advice be, if they want to move quickly, they've found this story and they want to take advantage of that story straight away without it taking 2 years, what would your advice be? Should they just start reaching out and networking, or should they go out and try and produce something to then show?
It depends on your skill. If you're a camera person, I think you can obviously film it yourself. Most people are like self-shooting producer directors. That's how the industry has changed a lot, especially with young people. They're more multi-skilled than most of us, our counterparts 20 or 30 years ago, which were more compartmentalized. But certainly if you've got the acumen to pick up a camera and you enjoy filming and editing, then you can put together, a segment or a taster, and just take it either to a network, or if you feel less comfortable doing that, taking it to a producer you may know, or a company that you trust. But do value your work, do value your ideas, and don't give them away freely because it is a tough business at the end of the day. So recognize your worth. Even if you don't have many credits under your belt, recognize, because it's hard work, and you've put in that dedication, and you've put in that passion, so you should be rewarded for that as well. So I would write a list, of checks and balances, and see where you feel most comfortable.
And should people think about telling more than one producer about it, or just going to one at a time and getting an answer? Because again, this question I get a lot is, once we've told a producer, are we beholden then to that producer and that network, or can we fish it around?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, the trouble with this business, it's so small, and so we're all pitching to the same commissioning editors, because there's only really a handful. Even with the streamers now, it's still quite a niche market for blue chip. It depends what your story is as well. If it's got more of a people angle, then you probably got a wider reach. But ask that producer to be honest with you. Say, are you getting any traction in this story? Or say, I'll give this idea to you for 3 months, for example, and see if you can pitch it or get some funding for it. But after that story idea reverts back to me. So you can ask them for a non-disclosure agreement as well, or a pitching agreement where you set a limited time, but follow your instinct. Do you trust this producer? Do you like working with this producer? How much have they produced in the past which is similar to your story is also very important, because you're not going to take a story on whales to someone who hasn't got a track record of, say, producing marine stories. That would be my advice.
Yeah, that's really valuable advice. I think certainly, go to producers who are producing similar content and have agreements, pitching agreements, like you say, whether it's a few months, 3 months, 6 months, just to protect yourself. So very important. Tony, thanks for taking the time out today and talking with me. Where can people follow your work, your films, your books? I know you've written more than just the P-22 book. What other books are out there that people can look up and find?
Sure. Well, my website is tonyleemoralbooks.com, and my Cat That Changed America is just that, the catthatchangedamerica.com. So I've got some filmmaking books on my website, because a real passion of mine is obviously film. So I've written a few books on film directing. And around the P-22 story, obviously, The Cat That Changed America, I wrote another novel based in California. And so Tony Lee Morale Books is a good start, I think, to find my work.
That's great. And people should look you up and check out all your work, because you've been prolific in both film and books, which is fantastic. Tony, thank you again. Really appreciate chatting with you. Got some great advice there. And all the best with everything you've got coming in the future.
Great. Well, thank you for having me as your guest.
If you have enjoyed this episode of the Master Wildlife Filmmaking Podcast, then please consider leaving a rating and a comment, and subscribe if you haven't already done so from wherever you get your favorite podcasts from. The ratings really help rank the podcast and get more people to find it. Also, if you know someone who is into wildlife filmmaking, or maybe they're a nature photographer and they're looking to transition and they aren't listening to the podcast currently, please tell them about it. Word of mouth is the best way for me to build my listeners for this podcast. I would very much appreciate it. And also, if you are looking to break into the wildlife filmmaking industry and you're just looking for help, you're looking for answers for burning questions that you have, then please consider looking at my Master Wildlife Filmmaking Mentoring group and mentorship program. You can find that at jakewillers.com and just click on the mentoring tab or learn more tab, where it says it on just the homepage there. You can find it very, very easily. And then lastly, if you want to help support this podcast, the best way you can do it, other than just telling other people about the podcast, is to go to our Patreon page. It's patreon.com/MWFP. That's patreon.com/MWFP. And there you can get all sorts of bonus content. We have extracts from podcasts that didn't make it to these episodes because they went on so long, because I didn't want to stop talking with our guests. So we put the extra content there. There are catch-up conversations with previous guests, finding out what they've been doing since I last spoke to them, and so much more of the behind the scenes. Please consider taking a look. That is the best way to sponsor this podcast and get more episodes in the future.